A woman walked here into my office about a year ago, mid-30s. She sat down, and essentially she said, Rabbi, I just found out from 23andMe that I'm a quarter Ashkenazi. My grandmother on my mother's side was Jewish. Apparently she changed her name in the 1940s and never told anyone. Does that make me Jewish? That was her central question. And I asked what I thought was my central question, hoping it would become hers, which was, do you want to be? She didn't have a clear answer, which was fine. She had assumed, like most people of our generations assume, that identity is something you discover. You spit in a tube, you wait 6 weeks, a lab tells you who you are. I want to argue that this is the most un-Jewish way of thinking about identity ever invented, not because the DNA is irrelevant. It's not irrelevant, but because in the tradition that I've spent decades inside, identity has never been something you discover. It's something you choose again and again and again and again for your entire life. The woman is having a very modern conversation, but it's also one of the oldest conversations in our time, in tradition, in the world, in human stories. The question in this case, in my case, the question is, who is a Jew? That question, what makes someone Jewish? It's a question of whether you can decide to be one or even stop being one. And the answers that our tradition has given aren't what most people have been told. Many people, Jewish or not, don't know that the first Jew in the Bible, in the Torah, was in fact a convert to Judaism, Abraham. Genesis chapter 12. He's 75 years old. He has no Jewish parents. He has no Jewish education. He has no community to support the decision that he's about to make. He has nothing to inherit. There's no Jewish people yet at that point. And then the Hebrew Bible gives us a two-word sentence. The two words in Hebrew are lech lecha. Essentially, it means go forth. There are other readings of the two words that say it means go forth, but go unto yourself, lecha, so it's a more reflexive verb, but still it's saying journey. In that moment, God speaks to a man with no prior religious learning in a polytheistic society and says, leave everything behind, your father and mother's house, your homeland, the gods of your culture. Go to land that I will show you. And Abraham, that man, goes. What the Torah is telling us in its founding act is that Jewish identity doesn't begin with biology. It's not the spit in the test tube. It begins with a choice, the choice to leave behind what was given to you and to walk toward something you have to construct. The first Jew isn't born a Jew. He becomes one by choosing. The word chosen I want to talk about for a moment because it's certainly in Jewish terms, a misunderstood word in our entire vocabulary, perhaps the most misunderstood. You'll have heard that Jews call themselves the chosen people, Am Segula, the treasured people, Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Not something that Jews ever call themselves, but that, according to the Bible, God called the Jewish people. Well, if you've heard this, you may have, as non-Jews did throughout history, thought that it assumed that they were somehow better than anybody around them, superior, favored, above the others. Well, that reading is not only wrong, it's catastrophic. Chosen in the Hebrew Bible, bechira, never means selected for privilege. It means selected for service, selected for obligation, selected for responsibility. The Jewish people in this view are not chosen the way an athlete's chosen for the all-star team. We're chosen the way a witness is chosen for a difficult assignment. Witness to what? That every human being is made in the image of God. That power is morally accountable. That memory is a moral duty, that the stranger must be protected, that justice is the precondition of peace. If you've watched Fiddler on the Roof, Tevye has the most honest Jewish response to chosenness ever written. He says, I know we're your chosen people, but once in a while, can't you choose someone else? What is chosenness when you look at the actual historical record? It means persecution and exile and inquisition and expulsion and pogrom and genocide. The most assimilated community, Jewish community in Europe, Germany, before the war, was annihilated. Chosen has meant mostly targeted. So nobody who reads Jewish history thinks chosenness is a gift. It's an inheritance of obligation that comes with a serious price tag. But here's the thing, the people who keep choosing it, like myself, keep choosing it, even at terrible cost in history. That fact alone should tell you something about what kind of identity we're talking about. Now, I want to come to the present moment because what I've been describing, identity as choice, identity as covenant, identity as something you continuously ratify, has a very specific contemporary relevance. For 30 years, the most important conversation in American Jewish institutional life has been a conversation about numbers, and the numbers on their face look like the end of a story. In 1990, a major national survey reported that 52% of American Jews were marrying non-Jews. The Jewish establishment used the word Holocaust to describe what was happening, literally. In 2013, Pew Research realized their first comprehensive they realized and released their first comprehensive study, an American Jewish survey. 58% intermarriage overall, 71% among non-Orthodox Jews. That makes sense. In 2020, Pew did it again. 61% of all Jews who married after 2010 married someone not Jewish. 72% of non-Orthodox Jews. Hebrew literacy plummeted. Affiliation was declining. For 30 years, institutional Jewish conversation has been a conversation about loss, the slow disappearance through assimilation. The narrative, and I can't stress how dominant this was the Jews essentially are running out of Jews. And almost no one was asking what should have been the obvious question. What if we're framing it wrong? Because Pew is measuring inheritance. They were counting people who descended from Jews, people whose DNA would show that, people who had the noun without the verb. What was happening to the population was real. The noun was eroding. The institutional infrastructure built around the inherited Jewish identity was, in fact, aging out. A massive number of people who had inherited Judaism as a noun suddenly discovering that they wanted it as a verb. Why? Well, because something in them woke up. Because they realized in the worst possible way, through the worst possible teacher, that identity is not safety, that assimilation is not protection, that being Jewish is not a private spiritual preference, but a public covenant. And that the question of who counts as a Jew has never in the end been decided by the Jews themselves. It was always decided, always answered brutally by their enemies. This is not new in our history. Spain, 15th century, Russia, 19th, Germany, 20th. Every time Jews convinced themselves that they had assimilated enough to fit in, to slide in, to be safe, history corrected us. The Jews who survived those corrections were not the ones with the cleanest assimilation. They were the ones with the deepest practice. So what does it look like to choose Jewish identity today in 2026? I want to be specific because abstraction helps no one. It looks like showing up somewhere, anywhere, a synagogue, a class. An institutional shape doesn't matter as much as the verb of showing up. It looks like learning Hebrew, not necessarily fluently, not perfectly, but enough to participate, to follow a prayer service, enough to read a passage in the Torah in its own language. Hebrew literacy is the muscle of Jewish identity, and it's atrophied for 2 generations. It could be rebuilt in any age. It looks like lighting candles on Friday night, the simplest, oldest, most stubborn act of Jewish ratification. The world is exhausted. The candles Friday night say we're standing tall, we're lighting these, we're realizing sacredness and identity through sacred acts. The week stops. You become a Jew for 25 hours again. It looks like raising children inside the practice, not adjacent to it, not exposing them to Judaism the way one exposes a child to a museum, forming them inside it. And it looks like, and I have to say this, refusing to let your Jewishness be defined by anyone else. Because the cost of October 7th is that millions of Jews are now Jewish primarily because someone hates them for it. That's not enough. It won't sustain you. It won't raise your grandchildren. You need a yes underneath the no. You need a positive content to your Jewish identity, not just a defensive crouch. The positive content, the yes, is what our tradition has been building for 3,000 years. The texts, the holidays, the ethical demand, the covenant, the 1,000 small disciplines of being a Jew in the world. That's what you choose.